Thank you. Just thinking about earlier today how one of the presenters was talking about how the bathroom technology and how your mirror is going to talk to you. And I just feel like this microphone, I've been here last year and did this, and hey, your receding hairline is 25% worse this year. Go see your dermatologist.
Don't get me started.
So, so I guess that's where we're going. So I work in the NBA. I cover the NBA for ESPN, and yesterday I just put out a pretty interesting article, research. You can see it up here, scheduled to sit when resting is serious business. We're seeing this huge transformation in the NBA where coaches are now resting their players, their star players, the LeBron Jameses, the Kevin Durants, the guys that everyone in this room wants to go see if they go see a basketball game. The coaches are sitting them not because they're hurt, but because they don't want them to get hurt. So this is preventative in their eyes, is that on back-to-backs, they're sitting, most of the games that they're sitting are back-to-backs, which are you travel from one place today to you fly overnight to another place and play another basketball game, 2 games in back-to-back nights. So the coaches last year sat their stars 146 times, and 5 years ago that was at 19. So we have a 700% increase in healthy scratches. So then it brings up all these interesting questions, which is this good? Is this sitting out good? Is resting good? Does it prevent injuries? And then a study out of University of Utah coming out in a journal shortly is saying that on back-to-backs you see 3.5 more times injuries on road back-to-backs than home back-to-backs. You also see a greater incidence of injuries when you have younger players playing on back-to-backs. So they're more predisposed to injury if they're younger coming into the league. So these people on my panel here are a lot smarter than I am. They can probably explain a little bit of that in experience. And actually, Paul Robbins here has been working in the NBA for quite a long time. He was telling me about stories of Pat Riley 20 years ago. I don't want to date you or anything. I was 10 years old when that happened. So
was I.
So I don't know if you've read the article, but when you see that coaches are now taking matters into their own hands and preventing injuries by resting a LeBron James on a back-to-back, your viewpoint is what?
Well, the first thing that we start with, because we can actually see the actual data from the guys, and there's so much more to it. The back-to-back that really makes a lot of sense to me is the back-to-back in a way, especially if they're playing in, like Phoenix. They'll play it in Phoenix, and then they have to play the very next night in Denver or in Golden State. That's a very quick turnaround. You're talking about getting in at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. So that's where the problem is. It's not so much the back-to-back, it's the away makes a big difference. So I could see that, but what we've been talking to the teams more about in the last year or so is not so much sitting them completely, but trying to shave a few minutes off a quarter or a few quarters. So we're really trying to back them down a little bit so it's not going completely to zero, because you're going to need them, because that's the biggest problem, is that you have to have them ready for the playoffs. You have to have them ready at the end of the season. So it's that give and take. But maybe if we just shave some minutes off, not sit them the entire game, that would be, number one, good for the league. And then number two, I think it's going to be better for the player overall.
James, would you consider sitting a player on a Thursday night game, because essentially that's a back-to-back, and the NFL world is you're playing a few days earlier. You're coming from, I think, week 16, you're playing my New York Giants on a Thursday night. So I'm just making sure. You're going to rest guys on those days?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's.
But why wouldn't you? If the let's say you're trying to make the playoffs. Are you going to feel conflicted if the readings on your player says, he might be better off resting this game because we need him for the playoffs? Would you consider that?
I think it comes down to, again, it's I like to call it the acute chronic kind of overload. So if we're training someone and looking at their training volumes consistently throughout the year, we should have a periodization plan for them in place anyway. And if it gets to that stage, it's what was his last training or last game, and call that like the acute volume or acute intensity, and then what's his chronic. So how do we look at over the last 4, 5, 6 weeks, where does he sit against that? And then we can look at, okay, so this game, if his acute volume goes above X, and if we talk in coaches' kind of language, say number of plays, so if his players goes over this, then he's an increased risk of getting injured by a certain amount of percentage. So the more we can do that and kind of plan for the future, then we don't really need to make a drastic change that week. We should be able to plan 2-3 weeks in advance and say, okay, we know a Thursday night game is coming up in 4 weeks' time. How do we adjust our training for that, for our key players or a bunch of the key players before that? I think the hard thing is when you get into positions that have low numbers, like quarterbacks, tight ends, who might only have 3 or 4 players. If you start minimising reps from one person, then the other 3 are increasing their reps, so their injury risk goes up. So it's a fine balance between, okay, how do I manage this, but also give them enough schematic time to learn the plays and go through it, but then also kind of lower that injury risk at the same time.
What's interesting is, correct me if I'm wrong, but NFL, you can't get in-game data based on loads or workloads.
We can this year, so it's the first year this year. We get it at lunchtime the next day.
So you don't get that real time, you just get it the next day. So it's Monday morning quarterbacking, like here's how we do it in the future, but you're not going to be able to get it in real time. In Australia, you get it in real time?
Yeah, so in Australia, working in Australian football, you get it real time, and that's where you can make decisions during the game on Australian football is kind of like ice hockey, where you can interchange consistently. So you can, okay, this guy has hit a certain optimal level of training, of performance. He's starting to decrease in his intensity. Okay, bring him off, let him recover. Look at his heart rate, how much has it dropped, etc., etc. So,
John, how do we make the NBA, the NFL, the players all care about this stuff and technology and being excited about solving this sort of problem, injury rates and all that?
Yeah, I think the players definitely see the benefit, as professionals like James and Paul know. I think the change in the professional organizations is they realize it's an asset utilization challenge. I mean, they treat their players no different really than the way Hertz treats a fleet of rental cars or FedEx treats a fleet of trucks. You know, they go in for predictive maintenance all the time. And not to offend the NFL or the NBA, but it's routine in baseball. You know, baseball rests players all the time. It's a game of finite resources. It's a game of attrition. 164 games are long. It's accepted that people get rest in baseball. And I think maybe in other sports that's new, relatively new. I think, you know, as you would know, I think it was Popovich that did this for the first time with the Spurs, and I think he got fined the first time.
$250,000.
The first time it happened.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think it'll become the norm, and it's good business, frankly. It's a good business decision just to get better, useful life out of your asset and make sure they're performing at their peak.
So I got a crowdsource from a man named Sam Hinkie. He's the former general manager of the Philadelphia 76ers. You guys might know him. I asked him, I was doing a panel today, and I was going to ask you guys a question. What question would it be? He says, where is the bottleneck to being effective? Do you need better science, better buy-in, better communicators, or more trust? So which one of those is the key to breaking up that bottleneck to being effective?
Do one of you guys want to take it?
I might have to say, repeat the question.
Where is the bottleneck to being effective? What's the obstacle that you got to get over? Do you need better science? Do you need better buy-in? Do you need better communicators, or do you need more trust?
I don't mind starting that. You know, the technology world is you in the clinical world. If you're here from the medical health environment, it's often the case that it's easy to say what the technology can do. So, in many cases in this area of elite performance, you know, technologists like Intel and other companies here, IBM, or people from SAP, will walk in and say, "Here's what the technology can do," and there's judgment and there's considerations about what it should do. So I would answer that as buy-in in this space. You know, we'll walk into teams and leagues and players associations and say, here's what's available, and you're usually met with a lawyer, you know, on one side or the other. And I'm not knocking people, but it's a policy issue in many, many cases. So from a technologist standpoint, I'd say buy-in is usually what stands in the way.
I'll jump on that. I think the key figurehead at all of it is the head coach. And if you can get buy-in from the head coach early on and be an early adopter from there, you're going a long way to increasing science, increasing everything else in the department. I think a big thing is obviously trust with the head coach as well, and then from there, if the players trust head coach and they trust you and they think you know what you're talking about, you're kind of you're on the train to the right direction.
And I'm going to add the communication is extremely important, because you got to get the trust, you got to get the buy-in, but then you've got to communicate it between every coach and the players to make sure that they're getting the data and they're using the data. So we could be collecting it all, but if we don't communicate it back to why we're doing it and how we're going to improve them, then they don't get the buy-in, because they need to know that it's being used, it's not just being collected.
I echo that, especially as Leslie pointed out, the inherent conflict in this world between labor, the players, and management. There's an inherent conflict there. So the communication of what's being done, transparent all the way through the ranks, has to happen, or frankly, I agree with, I think it was Steve's sentiment, that the players won't participate unless that is transparent.
We were talking earlier, a performance director for one of the NBA teams said that he would be doing backflips in excitement if he got 50% compliance with his NBA basketball team. 50%. That's what he's going for. And he said when he was in Australia in the AFL, if he got 95%, he would be wondering what's wrong. What is it about America that guys don't want to comply with this stuff? Like you've dealt with NFL players, you've done it on NFL and NBA. Why in America is Steph Curry, not that this is about Steph Curry, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, why are they skeptical of this technology in ways that Australia isn't?
Well, I'm going to start by just saying it definitely comes from the top down. Like you mentioned, like Miami, back in the late 90s. That's when I first started in and did VO2 testing with Pat Riley and did a lot of stuff. And I thought, wow, these guys are great. They'll do anything he says. So I go to the next NBA team, not even close. So that's how it really starts. So some teams, 50% is what they're shooting for, but there are teams that are getting 80, 90%, but it comes from the top. So that's what you got to start with. And it's the culture, and if that's what you're going to do, that they buy into it. And James can definitely talk more, but I know the Eagles have a very good culture around data.
Yeah, I mean, like we strive for 95, 100%. That's our goal. But I think it comes down to a couple of things. One, if we're just talking America generally and Australia generally, so I mean, the whole sports science movement kind of happened in Australia, right? If you look at America versus Australia, Australia has a population of 20 million. America's got 300 million. We don't really have the talent pool that's the same. So we were able to make a department like the Australian Institute of Sport of trying to basically maximise the potential of everyone that we had. Whereas in the States, there's some pretty good potential. So it was more about finding that talent and acquiring it. Whereas now it's at the stage where, okay, we've found the talent that we need. Now how do we optimise it as well as we can? So that movement has started kind of filtering through the States as well. And again, from the buy-in standpoint, if you can get the buy-in at the top, that's great. I think the other thing is that players really, they look at you two ways. One, if you've played before, you've earned their respect. And if they think you know what you're talking about, you've got their respect as well.
Did you play football?
I play Australian football, but I haven't put a helmet and pads on. Yeah.
That's football.
I played, top level, sure. First round draft pick, something like that. But I think at the end of the day, if you can earn their trust and they think that you know what they're talking about, and you don't breach that trust either, then you're going a long way and be able to get that. We kind of strive ourselves on having an educational process. So how do we educate our guys in every single facet of what makes them a Philadelphia Eagle, and what makes them perform at the absolute peak for as long as they can. And it's more of the explanation of that, I guess, is what helps us.
Yeah, I would say if youth sports federations, which are not very strong in the States compared to other geographies, showed the kids that embracing data and changing their performance programming and training based on data were to happen at a younger age, by the time that some get to the professional level, it would be accepted. But when you try to implement something like this at a professional level, when certain players are in decline, it's just a fact, then you'll get resistance because it's used to expose them rather than to help them at that point in their career. So that then you'll get resistance in some cases.
Yeah, so if you take some wearable tech. I work with a company that started 10 years ago in Australia, and if you fast forward to now, the veterans on the teams now in Australia have had, they've been exposed to that for the 10 years, so that's all they know, is that route. Whereas now coming in the States, we're in 2-3 years of some of the wearable tech. You've got Zebra, which is now getting used on game day, and we're just starting to get that data. You've got veterans who've been in the league for 10, 12 years, they've made X amount of money and been very successful. Not having this technology is like, why do I need it now? Mm-hmm. And so it's that conversation that's, okay, well, really we can look at optimizing your performance, but they have to trust you.
Yeah. And there is a shift. There is a shift going on because you got some elite players. So again, years ago it was Pat Riley that set the tone. Now you get some elite players on some of these top teams that are settings like I use the example all the time. A few years ago, when Steve Nash was at the Suns, the Suns brought me in to do VO2 testing in the middle of the season from guys that they were concerned with. Steve was obviously not somebody they're concerned with. He was an elite athlete and always trained hard. But he saw what the other guys were doing, goes, I'm going to do that too. So, and you've got some top players that are doing this, and then the other players on that team will follow. So there is definitely a shift going on.
I'm going to put you guys on the spot here because I know you love that. What's a real-life example that you helped a player or player's life? It's a pretty big question, but like, what are some ways that you can actually improve performance, improve the health, improve injury rates or decline injury rates? What's a real-life example of that?
I guess I have to start off with I was at Athletes Performance for a long time, and my specialty there is still metabolics and conditioning, and somehow I always got the big offensive and defensive linemen, and we're talking major guys that would come to me at 400 pounds and have to play every year at 350. So, but I do remember after a few years of that going, all right, and some guys starting to retire, it's like, we started educating them now on how they cannot do this after they retired. So it was more of an education on, all right, this is how we're going to play, but let's start talking about the future and what's this doing to your body. So there was a number of players that I felt really good about when they finished playing. They were no longer 350. They were dropping to 300, and they were getting back to a normal size. So that was a great.
What is a normal size?
Normal size for them, if I can get them under 300, that'd be normal. So yes.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I haven't got exact names. I think it's more. Number one is coming back from injury and just helping those guys day to day, whether that's with data and numbers and wearables, or whether that's attitude. And I think a big part of it is, and NFL in general, excuse me, is a very serious business. But then you also need to have fun and make it fun at the same time to get through seasons and get through pain and injury and be successful. So to me, that helping the players is more about being that lifeline for fun and entertainment, and you come in the office every day and joke around, but get serious when it's serious, but then and joke around when you need to joke around. So,
yeah, maybe for sake of variety, Intel put some technology this winter at the X Games on some snowboards for the snowboarders, and they had never seen in their sport G-force and rotation of some of their landings in Aspen. They'd never seen it before, and so there were medical people there just interested in sort of the stress that put on their soft tissue when these athletes came pounding down the mountain. So it was really interesting as just a technologist to sit there and look at an athlete see his sport for the first time in new light. He'd never seen this data before. And, ESPN was showing it, and it was for fan experience, but maybe some snowboarders are all the healthier for it. Maybe, I don't know, but that that was our contribution to sport right there.
So we only have like 5 seconds, and I do want to wrap up here. Is that big news hit in the NBA today that Chris Bosh, his career might be over. Might be. It's not official, but he had third case, or what looks to be a third case of blood clotting. 2 years ago, he got it at All-Star break. He had a pulmonary embolism, was in the hospital for a couple weeks. fought his way back, played basketball last season, and then had a reoccurrence last year around the same time. And then he really wanted to play this year, and he just failed his physical with the Miami Heat, and they just confirmed it today. But I just wonder if the people in this room, if he had a device on the road that he could input data about how he felt, and it was anonymous, like he wouldn't be Chris Bosh, the millionaire athlete, could that have been prevented? Or are there measures that he could have taken that he could be playing? And so I say that it's not official that his playing days are over, because I think some smart people in this room, or some people that you guys know, can maybe help an athlete like that get back on the floor healthy and able to play basketball again. So, questions?
Actually, we're going to move forward because of our timing. Let's thank this panel. Thank you very much.